when a startup company or an entrepreneur decides to really take that leap and start their own business, um,
Mhm.
they may not have the funding right away to go with some of the best database management systems that are out there. But the importance of it all is quickly becoming apparent, especially since the launch of the whole, this is the year for AI, I would
Yes.
say. And as that continues to mature, it's going to drive more and more demand towards the database side of things for proper management, results driven accuracy, things like that. So, um, I guess, first of all, before we jump into that, if you can share with me in the audience what your experience is at MongoDB. I know you consult with, as a senior consultant there at MongoDB, you consult to a wide variety of companies, and I'm just curious to know, what your experience has been since you've been with them so far.
Yes. I have been with MongoDB for over 5 years, and I started out with the right off the bat with the biggest companies in the world because I was in California, so all the tech companies. And then I moved to Europe, and I still work with massive companies in the banking sector or energy sectors,
And to be
any
specific,
sector
this
really.
would this be a comparison to global 500 type companies? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, that certainly uh, global 10 type companies were my customers. So um, I don't want to make names because
sure,
typically customers don't want to be named
sure.
um, publicly. So especially since this is going to be public. But to give my credibility, I have worked with enterprise scale customers, and I have dealt with databases that had very stringent requirements. But you placed this question from the point of view of someone starting out
Correct.
and needing to get a hold of a database that is enterprise grade because the application may start from zero and then eventually will grow. This is the desire of every application. Some make it, some don't. You don't know that at the beginning, but you know that you can get something that is capable, like MongoDB, at zero cost, because an M0 shared plan will cost you zero. Um, an M0 is fine for testing your ideas. Then, as you need a dedicated server, you go to an M10 cluster, and an M10 cluster will cost you about $60 to $70 a month, something that is still very affordable um, to someone starting out.
Yeah. So the content today regarding this video, just for the audience, is there's obviously different levels of stress that a business owner goes through once you decide to take that leap and start the business. That's one aspect of business that we'll talk about at another time. This particular case is when you start to see the success of your business and it starts to grow and it grows fast. And if you're applying AI to this, if it's done right, you will start to see that success much quicker at a much faster rate, which will create that demand for the database at a much quicker level. And that's where we are with that, is how do we create a database? And Daniel, if I'm understanding you correctly, the is it M0? What was the term?
Yeah, M0 is the name of the tier, the entry level tier that is free. So
Okay. So you don't have to
obviously,
start off with the Excel, PowerPoint basics and go with that. You actually have MongoDB.
it starts at a pretty decent level, like 600 per second, for example. So that is plenty of horsepower to drive a pretty decent proof of concept.
So would this be a cloud-based application? So that's where your information as a business owner, that's where your information would be, is in the cloud through MongoDB's network.
Yes.
Okay.
So um, MongoDB Atlas is in the cloud. It is hosted by AWS, Azure, or GCP, or a combination of the three. So if you want to, you can create a replica set. In MongoDB, our replica sets are your database cluster topology is 3 nodes with a primary, a secondary, and a secondary that copy from the primary. So you have 3 copies of the data at all times. And you can keep each of those nodes in a different cloud provider. So you can have your initial primary, say in AWS, and then your secondaries in Azure and GCP, respectively. Um, that doesn't mean that your primary will always be in AWS. It could switch to GCP or Azure, but you can give it a priority. So you can say, I prefer that the primary be located here.
Interesting. And so when you start to look at this from a visual AI application, you start to accumulate more bandwidth or memory needs, images or videos that need to
Yes.
be
Uh,
brought up or within that application. How does that normally work through MongoDB for the memory aspect of it? I assume that's probably what the gist of all of this is based on. Once you exceed a certain memory level, then it bumps up to a higher grade, an upgrade.
yes. So your primary requirement is to store your data. Your data is stored on disk. So your disk can grow, say, to 4 TB. We also have 14 TB disks. But typically, you want to keep your data under 2 TB per shard. And that is a completely different concept that I'm getting into. We'll keep it for later.
Okay.
You can horizontally partition your data to divide it up in multiple shards, they're called, and those shards shouldn't really grow past 2 TB for performance reasons, for backup and restore reasons, and we'll get into that at some later stage.
Understanding that 2 terabit type of platform, that's the beginner stage, that's that entry level stage. If I'm planning how I want to use those 2 terabits, I assume,
Terabytes.
for lack of a better term, partition. But if I had images and the content that would flow, that data that falls along with each image description and identifying data, I assume that's what I would have to plan for, is understanding how that would be allocated within that set of memory, or how would that normally work?
Yeah. Typically, you put your image files in S3 in a cheap storage solution. And the database keeps track of the location of those images. So each document will point to an S3 location.
Interesting. Okay.
So yeah, you don't want to put heavy assets inside the database. Some customers do it. They put PDF, they put images, they put images as binary files. What all that does is every time you query the document, you are transporting the image as well, because that's now part of the document. And you're increasing your data transfer, you are slowing down your queries, and so on. So in the database, you put the information, uh, like if if it's a document about me and there is a picture of me that you want to have, you put the picture in S3, and in the database, you put the link to that location in S3. So how do you use AI? Well, um, as there is an update, for example, to my document, you could call OpenAI and say, this is the data relating to Daniele, and classify it for me, and it returns back the information that you can then use for a vector search. And then you can find people that are close to Daniele in terms of the textual characteristics that you provided. OpenAI can also do image recognition, right? So if you pass it an image, you can get that image classified, and then you can get that image grouped with similar images. So you could then query for people that look like me. I don't know how useful that query would be to you, but maybe if I become a fugitive, maybe, and I have multiple personalities out in the world, you want to find all the people that look like the original me when I was a good guy, so that you can find the new me who is a bad guy with a beard
There's
and
specific
so on.
traits.
Yeah,
Well,
but
this is interesting. And, for the audience that's watching, the scenario here is we just use facial recognition just as a point of reference or an example. The idea here is when you really start to look at the application side of this from a comparison or matching side of it on AI, this could be case studies with manufacturers, white papers, legal documents, medical images. I mean, the list goes on of how this could be managed. This is really the basics of what we're talking about here, of how it's managed into a database management system, as well as in between maybe multiple AI structures, which now you just kind of you brought you made me think of this question, because if the Atlas um, structure has its own machine learning, is there a third party or an outside AI type application? Maybe it's just on the application side, so it's really just looking at the data transfer once a result is sent. Is that how that's working? Is that how you see that kind of being managed on a larger level?
typically the um, large language models are external to your database, because they already exist and you decide to take advantage of them. So you send, let's say, an API call from your database, from Atlas, to that other large language model, and get it to return some data that you can use for a vector search, for example. The vector search is something that runs in Atlas, and you can then say, can you give me similar documents to this based on your organization of that vector information? So Atlas can definitely also tie into multiple, as many as you want, really, multiple language models or image recognition models or even video recognition models, and get the information stored back into Atlas so that you can find similar videos, images, text, and so on.
So, I don't know if I know this answer. I know that one part of database management is defined by the user and the user's input and the amount of, you know, data that's tied to an image. But is there is there technology? I assume there's technology out there that scans the actual image or scans the video, any kind of is there anything along that line, or at this time that's really a separate application and it's really dependent upon the user on the data that they input or transfer over, like an upload of files that need to be associated to an image? Is that how that would work, or
Well, you can turn an image or a video into a binary document, and you can
that's what
store
you okay.
it. But you can also use a AI to look at that image and detect the traits that it finds relevant about that image. For example, looking at me, it would say one of the best looking men on earth, you know, and it would only compare me to the best looking man on earth. Looking at you also, it would put you in the same category. And so it, quite likely then an atlas search for me would bring you up based on that common trait. I think that example brings it a little bit more down to earth.
I'm just thinking of when you start to look at the science aspect of it, the science industries and medical, and you're starting to look at you know microscopic images to large images and stuff like that, space. It's interesting how that might be organized, but it's not automatic from the standpoint from what you're saying. It
No,
really is up to the user and how they're going to manage how even the AI scans that.
yes. So having AI and having data doesn't mean that that data is already automatically recognizable. There has to be a process of definition of those grouping, uh, numerical grouping systems that then you can use to determine the relationship between an image and similar images.
You made me think of another question. It's tied to this, but it actually is the infrastructure side. I know that when I was dealing with the video conferencing and video streaming industry years ago, that it was the amount of memory, but it was also the amount of bandwidth uh, that you needed to factor as part of your application, your overall use, especially if you had multi-location locations that you're calling to, like bridge calls and things like that.
Yeah,
Oftentimes, the users would not realize how much bandwidth it really took to support these kind of locations, all on a call together kind of thing. Is this the bandwidth aspect of it along with the memory? Is that also factored as part of a tiered structure with
okay.
MongoDB?
So I started talking about, yes. So I started talking about your storage requirements, and those come from the amount of data that you have. Um, you don't want to store the images for that very reason, for the amount of bandwidth that you would be using every time you query for just a document. Because instead of 2 kilobytes, you could be talking about 200
Yeah.
kilobytes.
Yep.
And then you multiply that times a million, a trillion, and things get big. So
Quickly.
um, there are four hardware elements. Your storage, which also has a speed. So it's a size and speed. How big is your hard drive and how fast is your hard drive? Your RAM, which is your memory, which is used to store indexes and current data so that your queries all happen from memory and respond quickly. Your CPUs, which is your, there is the number of cores that you have, and that is used for all the calculations. So you don't store anything in your CPUs, but when you are saying, how many documents do I have? Well, you're using CPU power to come up with that. And then your network bandwidth. And your network bandwidth is typically not challenged in a well-designed system. But if you create a system that stores videos in your database and you pull up documents that return videos, then you are going to start seeing really high network bandwidth usage. And so that becomes an important um, parameter to make sure that you have available to you. Um, so as your tiers grow, as you go from an M10 to M20, 30, 40, 50, your amount of memory and CPUs and network bandwidth and so on goes up. But really, the typical um, worry that you have is number one, RAM. Number two, the speed of your disk. Those are the two um,
Most common.
hardware metrics that are stressed at first. Yeah.
Hmm.
Of
Okay.
course, it all
Makes
depends on
sense.
the use case.
Yep.
So please tell the user that says, "Oh, the guy said RAM, but I say CPUs." Fine, fine, chill. Okay, there is a use case for everything. So I'm just
All right.
talking about the
So we're
most
going to
common.
jump over to something that's more theoretical at this point, since everybody is new to AI and the whole release of this to the public. And when we were doing our preliminary talks, there was some interesting other topics that I thought was good for the viewers to see, and that is, um, just the overall input. It seems like the misperception and hype that's out there is all over the board with the media, and trying to take the philosophy of, and this is the reason why we're talking about MongoDB's um, data management systems, is it's controlling the garbage in, garbage out kind of philosophy as much as possible and providing the best, most accurate results in those comparisons when you're trying to get some kind of direction from using artificial intelligence. And you had mentioned something that it could be almost as a medicine, or to improve life, or it could be a poison and create that additional stress. I've even, there was a couple of months back, I heard that physicians at one point, and I believe this is just a small number of them, but they didn't understand what AI could do, this open AI platform, and were using it as part of their diagnostics. And for the viewers out there, this was just an article I read, so this is not a trend or anything like that at this point, but they were quickly corrected in doing that, because
Keep
that
going to
is,
your doctor.
yeah, holy cow. I mean, talk about the thing you don't want to do. And I have found, just from what I've learned from the AI platform so far, the advantage of using AI is if you already know where you want to go from point A to point B, to be able to utilize AI as a way of providing various aspects of how you want to get to that point, especially when you're writing an article or something like that. It'll give you a variety of different versions of how that could be written and different topics that you want to choose from. If you're relying on AI to write the article for you, good luck on it being the actual result that you were anticipating. And that's where we are, at least in the public aspect of who has access to AI. Obviously, the programmers, like, there's a new AI platform that's just being released this week from Elon Musk. It's that X.ai. That's the website. Instead of .com, it's .ai, and that's space driven. So there's going to be all kinds of topics. They're bringing in a tremendous talent, it looks like, to be able to launch that. But I wonder how that's going to be utilized, and is it for still controlled by the human aspect of it, or are they relying on a total AI type output? Who knows? We'll figure that out as time goes by. But can you kind of go back to what you had mentioned originally of how it could be medicine versus poison, and what your perception is on those topics?
Uh, Yes. So my original idea of medicine and poison is that it came from the discussion of indices in databases. So you create an index to speed up your reads, so finding data more quickly, and that is a great medicine. But there is a flip side to the medal of an index, and too many indices um, slow down your writes. When you write a document, it has to also update the indexes that are affected. So if you affect one index is one thing, if you affect 10 is a different thing. So it will make your write a little bit slower. In general, the benefit of an index is much greater than the cost. So it's a much better medicine than it is poison. However, when you write 60 yeah, the maximum is 64 in MongoDB. So you write 60 indexes on a collection. When you go write, it has to update 60 indexes.
Yeah,
So yeah,
ripple
maybe
effect.
you start feeling that that write instead of taking 40 milliseconds takes 3 seconds and 5 seconds, and it becomes unbearable for the user because it's like, come on, man. When is this application going to start responding again? So mm, in AI, it's the same thing. If it, if you use it the right way, it's a medicine. It makes your life easier, and as you were saying, it will um, greatly increase your go-to-market speed or your ability to serve more and more customers or whatever it is you're trying to do. AI will make you more successful at it. But if you use it the wrong way, and like you said, you try to get it to write articles for you without providing the necessary inputs, then it's garbage and it's gonna
Prompts.
kill you. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that really starts to define kind of the reason why we're doing this with the BioNav site is it really starts to separate where the positive stress is managed versus the negative stress for individuals and entrepreneurs. So it seems so easy when you just talk about it, but to actually have the actions to take to organize that data in the right way up front saves a ton of time. You're able to grow much faster if you've got a successful product or service, and be able to manage your customers and the information that supports them in this way that you're talking about. So that way it is a medicine, and avoiding that negative stress level makes all the difference in the world. And we all know, most of us that have either been in a business or trying to launch it, the negative stress hits at the worst time, and it just creates a lot of time kill that you can't make up. So, Daniel, I think what we'll do is we'll wrap this up for now. And if there's additional topics or if we get some feedback from the audience, we'll certainly collect that and maybe have an additional video or two. But thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Thank you again.
see you soon. Thank
All
you.
right. Goodbye.
Good to be here. Bye.
All right. So we're still recording.
Yeah,
No,
that way you,
so we'll edit all this stuff out, but what's your thought overall? I know you got to run here. So,
yeah. So my thought is great discussion. I mean, great questions, not so great answers,
No, I
unfortunately.
think you did well. I was trying, there was one point where you were diving in pretty deep, and I still think it's worth keeping.
Yeah,
Did you hear that? So I thought you dove in deep on
yeah, yeah,
one or two levels, but anyone that's an entrepreneur, and especially what's going on out there, one of the things I'm going to say in my intro is, what are we all involved in right now at this time, or this time of the year? And there's been tremendous layoffs, and there's tremendous talent out of California and West Coast that have been laid off that are very technical. And what we're about to see is, I think, an avalanche of new businesses. And so
yeah,
these are the technical folks that will be probably interested in some of this. And then you've also have the health and wellness audience that'll be
yeah.
curious about it, you know?
Right. And I mean, I don't sense the connection with the health and wellness yet until you can prove that people are stressed out, which should be an easy thing to do, I think, but you haven't done it. So maybe you need me to ask you questions
I would like
that
that. I mean, if we can
will
ask each other
surface.
questions on that, would be open to that, maybe our next video.
Yeah,
But
I think
the
no,
perception I'm trying to convince an audience is, people hear stress, and all they hear is the negative stress side. And there should be actually a positive stress, like when you go out and work out, you're stressing your body, but the result is a very positive result for your body.
mhm,
There are emotional positive stress. So anyway, we'll start to dive into that a little bit more. But there's also
yeah,
this negative stress. If you are, and maybe that's what I do maybe at the end of this, as well, is talk about, why is this even a topic on BioNav, and just kind of hit it that way, and say, for those that are starting off, they may not have the budget in hand, and they're trying to go after VCs and investors and get that additional finance help. That alone, the stress level of handling, especially if you're in debt, in the red, and trying to still maintain your livelihood, and if you are even working on the side, I mean, all of that adds up as stress. It builds up fast. And if you don't make the right decisions
mhm,
planning your business, you're only adding more stress, in the negative
yeah,
way. And that's really what it
yeah.
comes down to. And so I'll end it in,
So
kind of like that. But
yeah,
the
no, I
positive
mean,
stress is, you're hitting it out of the park. Your products are selling, but you're starting to experience the stress that you're maxing out everything that you've just invested in, and you need to
yeah,
scale up fast, or you're going to lose business, and you're going to lose your VCs, and the list goes on.
yeah.
Right. So
Oh gosh,
it's that kind
I'm
of
getting
approach.
stressed out just listening to you.
All right. I know you got to
So
run, Daniel. So
yeah.
thanks again.